All right, guys. Welcome to the Mac Forum Sunday video chat for June 29th, 2014. It looks to me like we have the audio situation resolved this week. At least the meter in the Google Hangouts window says we're okay, so we'll go ahead and kick things off here tonight. Didn't really put together a straight-out rundown for the show. Had a couple other problems to resolve earlier in the day. Was starting to wonder if I was going to make it, but after not making it last week, I figured didn't want to miss 2 weeks in a row. Sorry about that one last week there. Wasn't really quite up to par, and didn't really feel like making a run at doing the show. So we're gonna give it a shot tonight. See what happens. I want to tell you that Brian, of course, aka Van Smith, is out preparing himself for some form of world domination. He probably won't be here. And I know that Rad Dave is out and about this evening enjoying himself. As I said, he occasionally has a life, and that life doesn't always include Macintosh computer screens, but that's okay, Dave. We'll forgive you for that. And we may have one or two people kick in and join in on the chat today. I'm not sure, but we'll kind of take that as it goes. For those of you that have been keeping an eye on the show, you know that we've had some things come up since the last show that we actually successfully pulled off. Of course, the keynote address has happened a couple weeks ago. A couple of interesting things come out of that. You're seeing Yosemite being announced, which is the next incarnation of OS 10. It's going to be 10.10, and that's going to be probably going into public beta soon. I've signed up for that. Hope I got in time. Keep an eye out. We're kind of working on a guide for that. We've got a few things in mind to let you know about that. I'm sure there are going to be some comments from folks wanting to know how you downgrade from Yosemite to whatever you were using before. And I want to just mention something about downgrading in general. I don't know if this will be true for Yosemite, but it's true up until now. If you are running on Snow Leopard, which is the last OS that was running on a DVD that could boot from a DVD, and you are thinking about upgrading either to Lion, Mountain Lion, or Mavericks, one of the things that I think you really need to do is to get a hold of an external drive if you don't already have one, or a second internal drive, something that you can use, and clone that operating system. In other words, clone Snow Leopard to the other drive. Test the drive, make sure it's bootable. And the reason I say that is you can back up, you can take Leopard, for example. Let's say that you want to go to Mountain Lion or Mavericks and you're not sure about it. And now you've tried it for a little while, you don't like it, or it doesn't work with some program that you're using. You can back up. You can go to back to Snow Leopard, but it's a bigger pain in the keister to do it that way than it is if you make yourself a bootable clone. So take a piece of software like Carbon Copy Cloner, or Super Duper, which are the two that seem to be preferred by forum members, but even Disk Utility will generate a Snow Leopard clone. Clone that drive that has your Snow Leopard installation. That gives you two things that are true. One is that if you have a problem with the new OS, with Lion, Mountain Lion, Mavericks, whichever one you put on, if it doesn't work for you, or you don't like it, or you forgot to check some piece of software and you realize that it doesn't run under, you got some of that old PowerPC software laying around, and you didn't realize it before you upgraded, and you can't run it under Lion, then your easy way to back up, to go backwards to the older OS, is very simply to reload from your clone. And you can do that relatively quickly. Booting from that clone is going to be about as quick as selecting it in the startup preference pane, or by holding down the option key while you're booting and selecting your external drive, booting from the drive, and cloning everything back to your boot drive. If you didn't do that, then the process of reverting to an earlier OS is a little more difficult. It can be done, but it is a little more difficult. So the easier thing to do is going to be to have yourself a clone. And when you're making a decision about going backwards in an OS, one of the other things you want to keep in mind is that as a general rule, you can only go back as far as whatever system your Mac shipped with. So, for example, if you were used to Snow Leopard and you bought a machine with something more recent, in all likelihood, you're not going to be able to go back to Snow Leopard on that machine. As a general rule, you can only go back as far as whatever shipped on your machine. There are occasionally instances where you can get away with doing it, but for the most part, it's not going to work very well, or it's going to be a colossal pain that's not worth the headache. We won't know for a while exactly what Yosemite is going to include. The general consensus right now seems to be that if you can run Mavericks, then you're probably okay with running Yosemite when it's finally released. Nobody's really talking about that right now because, first of all, they haven't even gotten to the Golden Master phase of that, which is generally one of the last steps before final release. And inevitably, as you work through the development cycle, there will be some features that get removed or changed because of difficulties with it, or some of the requirements may change slightly. So, as it looks right now, if you can run if you can run Mavericks, then you're probably good for running Yosemite. I do think that in all likelihood, you're going to want to be running it with more than 4 gigabyte of RAM. That's been true for the last couple of operating systems. Although they run with 4 gigabyte, they certainly run better. So you're going to want to, think about that as one of the things. When you do upgrade, if you upgrade the RAM, make sure that the RAM that you get is thoroughly compatible with the Mac. Some of the vendors are better about that than others. It doesn't have to be Apple-branded memory. There is no such thing, really. Apple gets its memory from other suppliers. But it doesn't have to be memory that you purchase from Apple. But it does have to be fully in spec and functioning properly. I can tell you from experience that that memory that is not fully in spec can be a nightmare to troubleshoot. I had when I owned a G5, when I first got it, I had a little problem with getting kernel panics regularly. Ran all kinds did all kinds of things, couldn't find a problem, ran the hardware test numerous times, that couldn't find the problem. And the machine would be behaving fine, and then all of a sudden, just crash and go into a kernel panic, or the fans going full speed. Well, I was away from home for a couple months, didn't work on the G5, and over that time I did a little research on the internet. found out about a program that tested the memory a little more thoroughly than Apple's hardware test did. Came back home, ran that memory test, and literally within a matter of minutes, the machine was consistently failing the memory test. Pulled the memory that was in it, went out to a different vendor, went to one that has a lot of experience in dealing with Mac memory, purchased the memory, slapped it in, and the machine ran fine from then until the day it finally croaked of either a dead power supply or dead logic board. So you want to be careful when you get your memory, even though it may not come from Apple. It's more important that you get it from a vendor that has a good reputation for selling memory that's in spec and up to the max spec, and you kind of want to know what their return policy, what their return fees are going to be. I've purchased memory from several different vendors. One of them deals primarily with PC components, but when I called them once and gave them the specs, the full specs on the memory that I needed for first generation Mac Pro, the 1.1, that 2006 edition, the tech that I talked to assured me that the memory was in spec and that if it wasn't, I could return it. And I took a shot on it because it was several dollars cheaper per stick than anything else I saw anywhere. And fortunately, they were in spec. The memory worked just fine. So that's the more key thing. You want to be sure that you have that memory up to spec when you're doing that kind of upgrade and getting ready to do an upgrade. The other thing you're going to want to remember as we start looking at, do I want to upgrade to the new OS? Do I not want to upgrade to the new OS? We're going to go into this a little more detail as we know more about what Yosemite is going to include. But if you are not one to be fascinated with the troubleshooting process, let somebody else have the headaches of being an early adopter. That's something that I'm not saying there will be a lot of headaches coming with Yosemite. I don't know that. Obviously, there's no good way to know that. But here's the thing. Anytime you make an OS change, no matter how stable the OS is, there are going to be some people who have problems initially. There are going to be some people for whom it just does not work the way their brain works. It's not a sign that the world is coming to an end or that the vendor, in this case Apple, is nuts. It's just a sign of things are not quite the way you want them right now. Let somebody else have that headache. I personally don't mind those troubleshooting headaches. To me, that's infinitely more preferable than trying to get malware off of a Windows box. Trust me on this. I've had to remove malware from about 3 or 4 different Windows boxes in the last couple of weeks. It's not fun. It's not something I want to do for any length of time. So I'll stick with the OS upgrades and whatever that may bring. For what it's worth, from my experience, as I've upgraded from various incarnations of the OS over the last few years, I haven't had a lot of problems. Now you can reduce the likelihood of having a problem by, among other things, making sure that your system meets the minimum specs and thinking about certain things. For example, when you made the jump from 10.6 to 10.7 to go from Snow Leopard to Lion and above, you lose the ability to run older PowerPC software. You need to know that before you go through the headache of upgrade. We get asked those kinds of questions on Mac forums quite a bit. We're kind of used to that. And as I say, we're going to have some advice about that coming up as we know more about Maverick. Excuse me. As we know more about Yosemite. When we know, you'll know. Uh, Sometimes we get asked questions that we don't know the answer to, right? Like, for example, exactly what the requirements are going to be. Well, right now, all we know is what others have been told, namely that if you can run it, and if your machine is running Mavericks okay, then you're probably okay for Yosemite. We also get asked a lot of times when it is Mac, insert name of Mac here, going to be updated. We don't know. None of us work for Cupertino, so we don't know. And as you know, even if we did work for Cupertino, Apple kind of keeps those kinds of things close to the vest. So, you know, we won't know that. The only thing we can do is give you some guesses based on history, what's happened in the past. But beyond that, we won't know a whole lot. This week, one of the things that's come up that popped up on the forum is the discussions of what to do now that Apple has announced its plans for Aperture, which essentially are going to go away for a lot of for all practical purposes. Now, by go away, I don't mean that it's going to stop working now. It's working under Maverick. It's working under Mavericks. In all likelihood, it will work under Yosemite. So we've got a ways to go before we hit that as an issue. But they clearly have an idea of moving on. I do a little bit of photo work, mainly with older photos and retouching some of them, and my needs are modest as far as editing and the like. Obviously, the smarter the software is, the better my editing looks, because I'm just not very good at it. So if the software is really good at it, then that helps me a lot. But I'm kind of sitting on my hands for a while. I'm not going to panic. I'm not going to start wringing my hands. I'm not going to go out and invest a fortune in the newest Photoshop CS or Lightroom or any of that. Partly because I'm not doing it professionally. It's strictly an interest of mine. I don't need massive amount of editing capability. In other words, what I already have in terms of having an older version of Photoshop and having the current version of Aperture gets the job done for me right now. I'm personally going to wait and see what happens with the new photo program that Apple discussed briefly at the keynote. It's their next step beyond iPhoto. Some of the editing capabilities that were in it look kind of interesting. I don't know if it will be available at the same time that Yosemite is released. It'll probably be shortly after that. But we know they haven't abandoned the photo market entirely. Apple, that program, I don't know if it will be sufficient for professional use, but certainly for a lot of consumer users, it's probably going to bring a little more capability than iPhoto. We'll have to look and see. A lot of it depends on how well implemented it is. So it's a really slick idea from what I saw in the keynote. If you haven't seen the keynote, go to the Apple site. There's a link to it. If you have Apple TV, there's a special events link there that has that keynote and a few others. Go to the keynote, take a look. I know at one time I was never a big fan of watching the keynotes. For a lot of years when I was first became a Mac user, I didn't watch the keynote, particularly at Worldwide Developer Conference, because I'm not a developer. I'm not like that 13-year-old they were talking about at the keynote that's developing. I'm not a developer. So it really didn't click with me. But for the last several years, they've come out with, either the day of the keynote or shortly thereafter, a new version of the OS. And so the keynote was always the way to show what they were going to do. They did that this time. They gave us a preview, a little bit of a sneak preview of Yosemite. They also gave us a look at iOS 8. Unfortunately for me, I won't be able to run iOS 8 on my phone. My iPad will run it, the phone won't. If you've got anything below a 4S, you can forget it as far as iOS 8 is concerned, unless that changes by the final release, and I personally don't think it will. Do not hold your breath saying, oh gosh, I hope Apple puts iOS 8 on the iPhone 4. Probably not going to happen. We've already seen reports from a lot of iPhone 4 users that iOS 7 didn't work well on their phones. So, I mean, for me, it's been okay, but I don't do a lot of high-powered stuff on my phone. I'm not doing photo streaming. I'm not doing editing. I'm not doing any of that stuff. So, for me, it works okay. It does what I need my phone to do. So that's the thing. If you haven't looked at the keynote, get a good look at what they're going to do. I know there are going to be some things people may like or dislike. As far as the interface goes, I know there's always going to be some disagreement about that. But keep in mind, Apple traditionally has given us ways to tweak a lot of the interface elements. So if we don't like a certain feature, we can adjust it a little bit. And when Apple doesn't, third-party developers have come in and filled the gap for that. So I'm looking forward to having Yosemite come out. I would love to be able to integrate some of the features that are in iOS 8, but I don't see myself getting a new iPhone anytime soon. That's probably not going to happen. Some interesting features are going to be there, but I may have to wait on those for a while. Those of you that are regular viewers of the forum know that we consistently have been getting questions about, you know, how do I set up for this? How do I get iCloud to behave itself? How do I get to this to happen, that to happen? And I anticipate more of those kinds of questions as we move forward. As longtime Mac users know, when Apple made the transition to iCloud, some of the features that were in MobileMe got lost. iWeb, for example, some of the capability of being able to have a storage area where you could share files, those kinds of things. That's not as easily done with iCloud as it had been in the past with MobileMe. Some of those features will be coming back, it looks like, with some changes that they're making, so this is a good time to be following things. Don't panic about any of it. It's just going to be a lot of fun. As I say, if you're not one of these folks that likes troubleshooting, let somebody else. Let the guys like Tattooed Mac and Harry B and Van Smith and I tackle those kind of troubleshooting issues. I won't say we like those kinds of issues, but we kind of take them as a challenge. In other words, thing X does not work like it used to. How do I change it? Or how do I need to change my behavior? Is this going to work, or am I going to have to change my behavior? So that's one of the things that I think is going to be interesting. If you just like to have your Mac running nice and smooth, wait a little while. Wait to update and see what happens. Also, keep in mind, though, anytime you do an update, and this is not only true for Yosemite, but it's been true for every incarnation. I've been using a Mac since System 7 on an LC2. And to be honest with you, in virtually every incarnation, and I'll talk about those that came up since the arrival of the Internet, With every OS that was released, there were always tons of people that said, oh, I hate this. This is unstable. That is unstable. That is unstable. If you read the internet, you would believe that every person was having trouble. In reality, the number of people who are having trouble with their machines with an OS is generally relatively small. That's because the people that are not having trouble are generally enjoying their machines instead of writing in and saying, oh, this is horrible, that is horrible, this is horrible, that is horrible. Every incarnation of the operating system has had, one person will post somewhere and say, oh, this is not working. And 2 or 3 people will join in. And if you're new to Macs, you would be led to believe that every Mac user is having this problem. That's usually not true. Sometimes it's something simple. A setting change, or someone has tried to upgrade and put the OS on a machine that maybe is not quite ready for it. Sometimes there really is a bug in the operating system. In those situations, Apple's been pretty quick for the most part to cure a lot of the bugs. They've certainly made their share of mistakes. But it's not something, I think, to panic about when you see those kinds of things. But that is why I say, if you're not one of these people who likes that kind of challenge, then stick with what you got. Hold what you got if it's working for you. Wait and see. Let other people have the being on the bleeding edge. The cutting edge of technology is also the bleeding edge sometimes. It just doesn't always work the way we want it to, no matter who the vendor is. With Apple, it's generally been a much easier transition than some people will see in other operating systems. But for me, I won't say that's true for everybody. I'll leave that up to you to decide. A couple other things I noticed over the last couple of weeks that I haven't figured out on my board of things that I'm trying to kill at the moment. I am not getting a good clone of Maverick. I don't know why. I haven't figured that out yet. When I figure it out, I'll let you know. But I will say something now that leads me to say something that I've said before, and I hope that you'll remember. I and many others on the forum are big-time advocates of cloning your system so that you can quickly restore yourself to functioning if something goes wrong. If you bork up a system file or anything like that goes wrong. The thing that I'm going to tell you, regardless to what software you use, some people prefer Carbon Copy Cloner, some prefer SuperDuper, some people have used the capability, the restoration capability built into Disk Utility. There are all kinds of cloning tools available for the Mac. Whatever you use, I think 2 things need to be true. One, use something that you understand that does seem to generate a good clone, and you can see on many forums places that where someone will say this one consistently works, this one doesn't. And the second thing is, when you clone your operating system, regardless of whether you're cloning Snow Leopard, Leopard, any of those, when you clone it, boot from the clone and test it to make sure that it's working. I've only had a clone fail a couple of times. Once I found it out the hard way, the clone would not accept my password when I needed it to. To this day, I do not know exactly what the problem was, because fortunately, when I was booting from the clone, my main hard drive wasn't dead, and I could kind of repeat the process, and whatever was wrong got cleared up. Right now, I don't know what's causing the hang up. I'm going to try and figure that out. When I figure that out, I'll let you know. It could well be the drive. I'm using an older drive. That could be an issue. There are a number of things I need to troubleshoot, but that's what led me to say When you clone your system, make sure that clone is good. When you're doing a backup, uh, periodically check to make sure that that backup, check the integrity of that backup. Look at some of the files in the backup. Make sure they're there. Make sure they're loaded. You don't have to do that a lot, but do it once in a while. All software, no matter who makes it, no matter who the vendor is, no matter what platform you're talking about, will mess up from time to time. And you don't want to discover that a mess up has occurred at the time when you really need that file. Okay? The other thing to keep in mind about making clones, if you are interested in cloning your system and making a bootable clone, Time Machine is not the way to go. Time Machine will copy the system files if you tell it to. By default, it starts that way with those set as what needs to be copied. But that's not bootable. What you end up having to do is boot from the recovery partition and then load your backup. So if you really want a bootable alternative, then Time Machine is not the way to go. It's an okay way to copy your stuff and have a good backup, but it's not the way to go if you want to produce a bootable clone. I think I'm probably here real soon for the blog. I've been putting off getting back into writing for the blog, and one of the things I think I'm going to look at is the viability of some of the online backup services. I briefly mentioned that when I wrote the original pair of articles, but I think a couple of those online services may have improved their operation as far as Macs are concerned. I'm probably going to take another look at that soon. If I can figure out a viable way to test to see which one is better. Because I think for some people, the ability to back up to an online service gives you an interesting idea, in the sense that one of the things that it gives you is offsite storage. As any part of your disaster recovery plan for data loss, when you're making a good backup, I think there's a couple of things you need to look at. One, what files am I going to back up? Am I going to back up everything? Am I going to back up only certain things? What format am I going to use? What program am I going to use? That kind of thing. And then also, the third thing is, do I have a plan in place for offsite storage of files? Because let's face it, let's say you have a backup of your hard drive. All right, you have a backup of your hard drive. You have everything in place there at your house, and lo and behold, you have some kind of disaster: fire, flood, hurricane. We're in hurricane season now on the Gulf Coast, so I know there are people out there that are thinking about what they need to do in the event of a hurricane. Okay? Well, if your backup data is in your house and you have a major disaster, then your backup data may get lost along with your regular data. It really helps if you have some variation of online or not necessarily online, but off-site storage. A friend of mine mentioned to me once that what he does is his bank gives him a safe deposit box as part of his regular account. He makes a backup on one of these portable drives, and then he takes that backup and he puts it in the safe deposit box. And he keeps a running backup regularly at home, and then about once a month he puts a new backup onto the one in his safe deposit box and then puts it back. That gives him off-site storage, a certain level of security, in the sense that you're going to need his, you're going to need to be able to have access to the safe deposit box to get to the backup. So for some people that may be viable. I encourage you to think about that and think about what you want to do. yeah, as far as a backup procedure. A couple other things that come to my mind that I'll be trying to take care of in the coming weeks. I may mention for the blog. Got a couple of ideas for a project or two that could be done with the software that comes on most Macs. Because I think one of the things you need to do when you make the shift from Windows to Mac, or if you're a new Mac user, before you spend a fortune on new software and learning new software, look at the software that's on the machine. I know we've all been victim. If you've been using a computer any length of time, most of us have been victim at one time or another of going out and buying a piece of software because that was the hot thing to do. Everybody was using Photoshop, or everybody was using insert name of program here. And you discover that you can't do something, or you don't like the way it behaves, and yet you can do something in the software that was built on onto the Mac. And I'll give you an example from my own experience. I had a photo of my paternal grandparents, and the photo, for whatever reason, had a little bit of a color cast to it. It just did not look quite good. It could have looked better. Even I, who am not good at that, knew it could be looking better. And I had a couple of plugins. I don't remember which one I used for Photoshop. I had Photoshop CS3. Ran it through the plugin. Came up with a variation of the photo that looked pretty good, but it was just a little bit off. And I was getting ready to write something, write an article for someone else about about using Mac software, and just for the heck of it, I loaded the photo into a preview and started experimenting with the color controls that are available in preview. And within a matter of a few minutes, I had corrected that last little mistake that was in there, that last little bit of color that I couldn't get rid of. I'm not going to tell you that Preview is better for that than Photoshop or Aperture or Lightroom or anything like that. It's more along the lines that sometimes the thing you need is the simple solution. You know, the KISS principle applies when it comes to selecting software and picking the things that you're going to use, the tools that you're going to use to do a job. We've seen people post before looking for a PDF editor. I need to edit a certain PDF, or I need to create PDFs. Well, if all you've got is pretty basic PDF needs, creation and editing needs, you can do that within Preview, or you can create the document using your word processor, your page layout program, whatever you're using. And as part of the print dialog, one of your options is to print it out to PDF. And then Preview has some basic annotation capability built into it. Does that take care of all PDFs? No. Is that going to get all your PDF needs taken care of in one shot? No. Certainly, there are going to be some documents that are a little too complicated, Preview can't handle. You're going to need third-party software. But for basic stuff, I have a third-party PDF editor. I like it. It's good. Pretty good. Does what I need it to do, and it's fairly easy to understand. But for just basic PDF creation, most of the time, I just go to my print dialog and deal with printing, you know, go to the print and select it and set it up and do the print to PDF thing. And let that do it, because most of the time that generates what I need it to be. Something as simple and something that is built into the OS. My Windows using buddies are occasionally a little bit jealous of that capability. They don't, you know, they don't like having to necessarily have to go in search of extra software. And when they ask me what can do that on Windows, I have to confess to them, I don't know. Okay, and the reason I don't know is this. I did not buy a Mac to waste a lot of my life keeping track of which Windows applications do what and which ones do it better. Okay, I have enough of a headache trying to remove the malware when they call me in the afternoon and say, my computer has got this toolbar and I didn't install it. Where did it come from and how do I get rid of it? Okay. And sometimes are quite surprised to discover that they've got to run 2 or 3 pieces of software to get rid of all the malware that's infected their machines. I've literally had a couple of instances recently where people have thought that their machine was seriously hosed. And a lot of it had to do with malware and a failed attempt to remove some malware. So I didn't get a Mac to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the alternative software is on Windows. Sometimes if I'm doing something for work and I need to know what the Windows alternative is, yeah, I'll go looking for something. But beyond that, I tend to first look and say, what Mac software will do this? Because I prefer to spend my time working in a Mac. I understand Windows. I know where to go looking for the software. I know who to ask when I can't find the answer. Dennis, I hope you're listening. Thanks for the heads up there a couple of times when I've had to look for an alternative. But for the most part, my first reaction is to look at the Mac software that I have. And I generally, I've got some software on my Mac that I haven't used in a long time. Just because, hey, I've had it for a long time. It's still running. It's older software. It's still running. It does what I need to do. I haven't upgraded. I'm still running Photoshop CS3. Did they add a lot of nice features in between since then? Sure. Will I eventually upgrade and probably go to one of their online variations that they're doing now? Maybe. But right now, no good reason to do so. That's always the counterbalancing point. Is the software going to do something that I really, really need? Because sometimes upgrading software is not cheap. Particularly if you're looking, one of the reasons that Adobe went to the online model that they're using now, I'm sure they're hoping that it will generate money for them, but one of the reasons that they went to the model that they have is the cost of upgrading. If you're using Creative Suite, you upgrade the entire suite. It's expensive. So, because I don't use that software professionally, I have to think twice about the upgrade and how much it costs. So that's another thing to think about. Be sure as we go through the coming weeks that you think about that. Look first at what you have and see if that solves the problem. And along that line, I'm going to try to remind myself to do the same. I mean, it's kind of hard to resist sometimes when you get that email that says, hey, we got this new bright, shiny piece of software. It does this, this, and this. Can you want to try it? Well, yeah, we all have to resist that temptation sometimes until we find something that does exactly what we need it to do. And along the heading of marketing email that's a problem, I want to mention one that I've gotten recently, and I found another instance of it in my junk mail recently. Apple's junk filter had filtered this right into the trash. Some of you may recall that a couple weeks ago I mentioned that I had gotten an email. It says your account will be, I think the word was destroyed. Okay, supposedly from Apple in relation to my iTunes account. Said your account will be destroyed unless you click this link and update payment history, etc., etc., etc. Well, a couple things caught my attention immediately. One of them was when I looked at the email header, It was sent to an account that I have never used with iTunes at all. Account has never been associated with iTunes. So that was the first red flag. Second red flag was Apple in their email tends not to use words like your account will be destroyed. Okay, that's just not a turn of phrase that I have ever seen in legit Apple email. Third thing, and this was something that really I did not catch on to initially, but my wife caught on to when I read the email aloud. The grammar was just a little off. It had that, and this is no insult to members who have English as a second language. It really seemed like someone maybe whose native language was Russian or something of that along that line, and English was their second language, or a Google Translate page. There were just enough grammatical errors to convince me that this had not come out of the bowels of Cupertino. And I've gotten another one of those recently, and in the process of going to a couple of forums, including Mac forums. I've seen some reports from other people about getting similar ones. So if you get that kind of stuff, take a look at the email header. See who it's from. What email address is it showing us from? Also, is there any reason for you to need to update your information? In my case, this last one of the reasons that it caught my attention was I had just updated, literally just like 2 days before, updated my account information, okay? Because I noticed something that I needed to change. So there was no need to go back 2 days later and update things. So if you have a suspicion, when you get not just from Apple, but from any vendor, when you get one of those emails that raise any kind of red flag at all, rather than clicking on the link that's in the email, go directly to the site for that vendor. And check things out. If necessary, call their customer support people. And you know, because what we're seeing is the spammers, obviously, and some of our some of my fellow admins on the board will tell you. Not only do we get the fun of looking through the spam that comes through our personal email accounts, but we're constantly fighting a battle on the forum with spammers wanting to spam the forums, and they're getting more and more creative about it, and we're spending some time and energy trying to make sure that you guys don't have to see that because it's annoying. And we want to have as much freedom as we can for legitimate posts, okay, without having to deal with a lot of spam and garbage on the forum. So, and the current system seems to be working reasonably well. I want to commend my fellow admins. Sometimes I'll go to delete something as spam, and somebody else has already caught it. Bob Toomey is pretty good about that. He's a resident spam detective. He's getting really good at ferreting those guys out. And that's a good thing because it means that there's less of that for the users and less of that for the rest of the admin group. I also want to mention to you briefly, just on a rundown for next week, I'll probably have some comments about one or two of the projects that I'm working on, and I'll probably have something for the blog come up between now and then. I'm going to go ahead and call it an evening for tonight. And I'm hoping that in the near future we'll be able to get some of our Aussie and European members joining in the chat. We're kind of working on that. That 12-13 hour time difference to Australia. We're working on that. See what we can do. But I know, for example, Harry B, Tattooed Mac, a couple other guys. They have a lot of good information. I'd like to give the rest of the members who don't know them an opportunity to get to know them. Our Member of the Month voting is about to start. want to encourage our members to vote in that, and I'm hoping in the future to be able to arrange it so that we, as each person gets selected member of the month, we're able to work out a time to get them on the Sunday chat, like get to know them a little bit, and see what their knowledge, what their Mac knowledge is. It's one of the nice things about Mac forums is no matter how long you've been using Mac, there's bound to be someone on the forum who knows something that you don't know, or has tried something that you've never tried and managed to make it work. So stay tuned. We'll have more tips, tricks, breaking news, etc., etc., etc. Let me know if you're kind of interested in a kind of a This Week in Tech History feature. I'm thinking about adding that to the Sunday chat. So let me know what you think about that. And until next week, we'll see you on next week's Sunday Mac Forum chat. Thank you for joining us.